Welcome back to Conspiracy Theories and Chill. Today's episode takes place on the 16th anniversary of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. It's very important to remember the events of September 11th, not for the reasons that the establishment wants you to remember them, but because the agenda of war set in motion by these horrific false flag attacks is still in full swing today, and therefore the events of 9/11 continue to this day. 3,000 people were killed during the attacks on 9/11, but millions have been killed in its name since. The military-industrial complex's agenda of war and genocide of the Muslim people has been allowed to head forward at full speed since 9/11 and shows no signs of stopping, whether or not they had anything to do with the event.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
That's why seeking 9/11 truth is so important. All of this death and destruction that our military has been carrying out in the name of defending us from terrorism is all based on a lie. And I believe the key to bringing it all down lies in revealing the truth about 9/11. Unfortunately, to do that, we've been placed up against the most powerful propaganda and mind control force that's ever been put together, the American mainstream media. The media was the most powerful weapon used against us during the September 11th attacks. They immediately started selling the official narrative even during the events and drove it home continuously afterwards, collectively ignoring and suppressing everything and everyone who dared to speak out against it. It's not that evidence and whistleblowers don't exist, it's that they're ignored or painted as crazy conspiracy theorists, when to me, the official accounts of the events of September 11th is the craziest conspiracy theory of all. 19 terrorists led by a madman on dialysis from a cave fortress in Afghanistan hijacked 4 commercial airlines and piloted them unmolested by our Air Force for over 2 hours, hitting 75% of their targets, one of which being the Pentagon, the very headquarters of our military located inside the most protected airspace that there is. The official story requires you to ignore that in the history of building with steel, only 3 steel frame buildings have ever collapsed due to fire, and all of which happened on 9/11, and only 2 of them were hit by a plane. The official story also requires you to ignore the laws of physics. The Twin Towers both completely collapsed to dust straight down into their own footprint at nearly free fall speed, one after only burning for 56 minutes and the other for only 102 minutes. Building 7 of the Trade Center complex, a 47-story steel-framed office building located 100 yards from the North Tower, also completely collapsed into its own footprint at nearly free fall speed later on that afternoon at 5:20 p.m. Witnesses' testimonies that hurt or contradict the official story are just ignored.
You were the janitor, you cleaned the stairways, 110 floors.
Yes.
Your office, sub-basement level 1, there are 6 sub-levels. So the lobby, then sub 1, sub 2, sub 3, sub 4, sub 5, subs. You were at sub 1, you punched in at 8:30 in the morning, you were late, you weren't going to go to work, it was a beautiful day, you were going to take off.
Correct.
You come into work because your boss asked you to, you came in, you were a little bit late. At 8:46 you heard an explosion. from beneath you,
from below.
from below.
Yeah.
It was so big that it lifted you up.
Everybody in the office,
14 people
14 people.
lifted you up.
Correct.
A few seconds later, you heard another explosion.
Coming all the way from the top of the building.
Turned out that was the plane,
That was a plane.
the first plane.
Mhm.
But there was definitely an explosion before the first plane.
Oh, 100%, 100% sure.
You have a lot of witnesses who were down there
Yes.
who would confirm that fact.
Yes.
You told that fact to the 9/11 Commission?
Not only did I tell the fact to the 9/11 Commission, but I gave them a list of the eyewitnesses that were there that experienced the same event as I did, and they were never called to testify.
And was your testimony included in the 9/11 report?
No, it doesn't show anywhere.
It doesn't
Actually,
show
it was
anywhere.
omitted. There's 576 pages on that book, and you won't find my name anywhere.
Anywhere. You go all over the world and you speak about what happened to you on that day, the fact that you had one of 5 pass keys that allowed you access to any and all doors in the complex.
That is correct, and I have a speech that I do all over the world as a motivation speech, but it always tells the real story of what happened on 9/11. And, like I said, there's a lot of respect all over the world for this kind of story, but when I come here, I am able to tell the story, but it's always either edited or presented in a different way. And only, I guess, C-SPAN had the only pants to actually put my story without editing for basically almost 2 hours.
For 2 hours.
For 2 hours, they let me tell my story. The only media network that allowed me full coverage.
I remember there was one interview that you were doing where you said, I heard a boom, and then they cut the
Oh,
footage.
that was ABC News. You can see it on Google.
Right, so what you said was, I heard an explosion from below. But as soon as you said explosion, they cut the
from
tape
below
and they
said
made it into the plane.
in the plane. Yes.
Yeah. You're not a conspiracy theorist, are you?
I don't.
You're a
am not.
survivor.
I'm a survivor. I was there. I experienced the event. I was affected, and I'm still affected. It's 7 years. I'm still have open wounds, emotional open wounds. I have to go through this depression, argumentation, and debate constantly with politicians fighting for victims' rights. It's just, I'm an activist, but at the same time, I'm a person that was affected by the worst event that we have ever experienced here in the United States. And I tell you, it's just not easy. It doesn't get any easier.
And you and the rest of the survivors, what you're calling for is a new and thorough investigation where all of the witnesses and survivors will be interviewed and it all will be included. Now, there's a man who you met on September 11th, Felipe David.
Felipe David.
He was on sub-level 2, beneath you,
Mhm.
in his office, which is a small closet-sized office.
Right.
His job was to refill the vending machines.
Mhm.
And you met him that day in 9/11
He was
because
totally burned.
he was burned.
totally burned.
He was beneath you.
He was beneath me, yeah.
No one on your level was burned,
No.
but he was beneath you in level 2. He was completely burned
And there was-
from the waist up.
And there was other people as well that got stuck on the floor below us because of that explosion. They went into an elevator to protect themselves because of the fire and the debris and all the things happening at the
So
same
there was
time.
no fire on your level, sub 1, but
No.
there was fire, sub level 2.
There was no fire on the area where I was. I don't know if there was fire on the opposite side, but not on the area that I was. No, definitely no fire.
So Felipe came up to your level.
Came up to the level, came by the by the area of the office itself, with the hands extended, all the skin hanging, 33% of his body burnt, pieces missing from his face.
And you helped him out. You got him into an
Yes.
ambulance. You
I took
then
him
went
outside.
back in.
Correct.
You went back in 3 times.
Correct.
You're credited with saving over 100 people's lives.
Something like that.
Yes. You yourself were the last man out. You dove underneath the fire truck as the
Yes.
debris fell,
Correct.
and somehow
Correct.
you were able to get out.
I came out. I brought a person on a wheelchair named Ed Bayet, and when I put him on the lobby with the 3 other firemen, I was told to get the ambulance ready. When I went to get the ambulance ready, the building started to collapse, and the only thing I saw was a fire truck. I sleep right under the fire truck, and the building collapsed right on top of me. I was the only one that survived at that moment because all that group of firemen and the man on the wheelchair died at that moment. I'm the last person to exit the building, last man out of the building.
So here we are 7 years later, 9/11, a horrible day in American history, and Willie Rodriguez, a hero, a friend of mine. There you go. He just wants to tell a story, and I don't know, 60 Minutes, 2020, NBC News, Dateline, somebody, tell this guy's story.
Yeah, where the fuck, what do we do? We made it outside, we made it about a block.
We made it at least two blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated,
Yeah,
as if they were
detonated,
planned to
yeah.
take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
Just ran up West
And then you just saw this cloud of shit chasing you down.
Couldn't
Just
outrun
ran
it.
up West Street.
I could outrun it.
So what'd you do?
I jumped behind a battalion car, I hit under the car, I was just waiting to die.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the vice president, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, do the orders still stand? And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?
That last clip was then Secretary of Transportation Norman Mineta, who was with Vice President Cheney in the emergency command bunker at the White House. It could be very helpful to find out exactly what coming into the Pentagon was being reported to Cheney, and what orders still stood. But since it contradicted the official 9/11 story, it was left out of the final report entirely. The official 9/11 investigation was a complete farce, and literally no investigation at all was done into those who had benefited from the attacks on 9/11, and fortunes were made on 9/11. For example, just 2 months before the attacks on 9/11, Larry Silverstein signed a $3.2 billion 99-year lease of the entire World Trade Center complex, even though the towers were full of asbestos that would cost billions to remove, which is why the city needed out of them to begin with. Silverstein took them anyway, and he heavily insured the towers specifically against terrorist attacks, and ended up making $7 billion in insurance claims off his $3.2 billion investment, getting rid of the asbestos-laden towers in the process. And that's just one example of the profits and fraud committed on 9/11 that is outright ignored. I was recently in a debate about the events of 9/11 with a skeptic, and as I briefly covered here, there are many pieces of evidence that contradict the official story. They're just ignored. The media is unfortunately hijacked, and now works against the American people. Because of that, truth often becomes a very hard thing to find. But even though the truth of 9/11 continues to be suppressed, awareness is growing slowly. More and more people are waking up, so it's important that we keep going and fighting for the truth. It's the truth that they're afraid of, and it's the truth of 9/11 that will set us free.